Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder what online posts might tell us about how someone is really feeling, especially when they're struggling with something like depression? Well, this new study dives right into that question, looking at the language people use when they're feeling down. So imagine this, you are feeling pretty low, maybe really sad or just not yourself. You might not want to talk to a doctor right away, but you might end up posting about it online. Maybe on a platform like Reddit. Researchers have been looking at these online spaces to try and understand depression better. And while they're good at spotting if someone might be depressed, figuring out how severe that depression is, or even how bad specific symptoms are, that is a bit trickier. This study wanted to see if the words people use online could give us clues about the severity of their depression. This is super important because lots of people don't seek help early on. They might express their feelings online first. So, if we can learn to read those online clues, we might be able to help people sooner. The researchers took data from Reddit users who had also filled out a questionnaire called the BDI-II. This questionnaire is a way for people to rate how severely they're experiencing different depression symptoms. The researchers then looked at the language these users used in their posts. They looked at a few different things like using I, me, and my a lot, which they call first-person singular pronouns. They also looked at words that express negative emotions like sad or scared. And they paid attention to absolutist words, which are words like always or never, Those kinds of words that take things to the extreme. They compared how often people use these words to their scores on the BDI. Now, the really interesting part is what they found. They discovered that as depression gets worse, people tend to use more of these absolutist words. Think about it. When you are really down, things can feel like they'll never get better, or that you'll always feel this way. That kind of all or nothing thinking, those absolute statements, seem to go up as depression gets more severe. And here is another big one. The use of negative emotion words was a really strong clue about how severe someone's depression was overall. This makes a lot of sense, right? When you are feeling very depressed, you are probably going to use words that express sadness, grief, or other negative feelings more often. So these language clues, especially the negative emotion words and absolutist thinking, seem to really be linked to how severe overall depression is. This is fantastic news for understanding depression better. It means we might be able to build tools that can help us spot signs of depression and even gauge its severity just by analyzing the text people share online without needing those formal tests. But, and this is a big but, when they looked at the severity of individual symptoms, like how bad someone's sadness was, or how much they were struggling with physical symptoms, the language clues didn't line up as clearly. They couldn't find strong links between specific words and the severity of those individual symptoms. It seems like the language is better at telling us about the overall picture of depression than the individual shades of a symptom. The researchers mentioned that they looked at things like first-person pronouns too, which other studies have linked to depression. The idea is that when people are depressed, they might focus more on themselves. They found that indeed using more first-person pronouns was associated with overall depression severity. They also looked at readability, how easy is it to understand what someone is writing. Interestingly, they found that as depression got more severe, the writing actually became easier to read. This might seem a bit strange, going against what some other studies have suggested. They thought maybe creative writing skills don't always suffer, or maybe people with depression are more articulate online than we might think. But they also said this finding was less significant when they adjusted for other factors. So it's something that needs more research. They did a statistical test to make sure their findings weren't just by chance. A sort of fluke ometer called a p-value. When that p-value, after some adjustments, was really low, it meant their results were pretty reliable. So they confirmed that first-person pronouns and negative emotion words were indeed linked to overall depression severity. In their final analysis, they really honed in on what predicted overall depression severity the most. It turned out that negative emotion words were the strongest predictor. While first-person pronouns had a connection, it was much weaker. This further emphasizes the power of those negative emotion words in understanding depression severity. Here is a really fascinating part. They noticed something a bit confusing. While negative emotion words were strongly linked to depression severity, negative sentiment detection using their language models was a bit weaker. So they looked closer at specific posts. They found that sometimes even people with severe depression would write posts that sounded positive or neutral. Maybe expressing gratitude or talking about everyday things. They even mentioned the idea of smiling depression, where someone might feel deeply depressed but outwardly appear fine or even express positivity in their writing. They highlighted a user who had a very high depression score, but actually wrote many posts that sounded positive. This really shows that language is complex. And just because someone feels terrible doesn't always mean every single thing they write will sound negative. Sometimes people might use online platforms as a way to cope, or they might have to put on a brave face even in their writing. This figure they showed really illustrated the point. It seems like negative emotion words are more consistently tied to depression severity, while negative sentiment in posts can be a bit more varied, especially in people with severe depression who might still be expressing positive or neutral thought. So, to wrap up what they found, first-person pronouns and negative emotion words are indeed important markers of depression. The use of these words increases as depression gets worse. They also found that absolutist language, those always and never words, also goes up with depression severity, which makes a lot of sense when you think about how overwhelming and hopeless things can feel. The big takeaway here for me is that while language can tell us a lot about the overall severity of depression, it is less clear about getting specific with individual symptoms. The researchers suggested that maybe the connections are just weaker for individual symptoms, or maybe their study was just too small to pick up on those finer details. They think a much larger dataset might be needed to really untangle the language of specific symptoms. Now, like any research, this study has its limits. They used Reddit users, and we don't know anything about their demographics. So, can we say for sure these findings apply to everyone, everywhere? Not necessarily. Also, they had about 170 users, which for some statistical analysis might be a bit on the smaller side. They also mentioned they used word lists from different sources, which might not be as cohesive as using one standardized tool like Luke, but they explained why they couldn't use Luke for this particular study. Overall, this is a really valuable study because it helps us understand the connection between how people write online and how severe their depression might be. It strengthens the idea that language analysis can be a useful tool for early detection of depression, and that is incredibly important for getting people the help they need sooner. I think what is really exciting is the potential for these findings to be used in digital tools. Imagine an app that could flag if someone's language pattern suggests they might be struggling with severe depression, prompting them to seek help. It is a way to offer support on a massive scale, especially for those who might not reach out otherwise. The researchers also pointed out the need for more long-term studies, looking at how language changes over time. If we can track these linguistic shifts, it could be even more powerful for early detection. One big hurdle for this kind of research is getting access to enough data with clear ground truth, meaning we know for sure how severe someone's depression is. Getting that self-reported data from lots of people takes time and can feel intrusive. So, they even suggested that maybe in the future, researchers could get consent to look at electronic health records along with social media posts, which could really accelerate this kind of research. My personal take is that this study is a great step forward in making mental health more accessible. It shows how something as simple as the words we choose can hold so much information about our internal state. The fact that negative emotion words and absolutist language are strong indicators of overall depression severity is a really clear and actionable finding. The limitations are well acknowledged, and the call for more research, especially longitudinal studies and larger datasets, is crucial. It really highlights how we can use technology to understand and support mental well-being in new ways. But we always need to be mindful of privacy and ethical considerations. What do you think about using online language to understand depression? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this breakdown helpful, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more fascinating science explained. We release new videos every week, so hit that notification bell so you don't miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.